Nearly all countries in the world are in debt. The United States currently carries more than $38 trillion of debt, the highest level in its history. The European Union owes around $14 trillion. Japan is close to $9 trillion. Even oil-rich countries like Saudi Arabia or export giants like Germany and China are under significant debt burdens. But here is a strange contradiction. If everyone is in debt, then who exactly is on the other side as the creditor? Who holds the money? In reality, the issue is more complex than it seems. Debt is not just a burden, it is almost the backbone of the modern world. Wars, crises, economic booms, and collapses all rise on top of this invisible structure. And when you look back a little further, you realize something. The world is not actually indebted to a single person or a single country. It is more like a system circulating within itself. In other words, everyone is in some way both a debtor and a creditor. To understand how we got to this point, we need to go far back in time. The roots of today's massive debt system go back long before credit cards or digital banking, all the way to times of war. In 1694, England was at war with France and running out of money. The state found a solution by borrowing from merchants. In return, it promised payment from future tax revenues. To organize this system, the Bank of England was established. This was actually a turning point, because for the first time the state began to say, I can spend money I do not currently have. In return, investors received a tradable promise from the government, bonds. This model spread quickly. France adopted it, the Netherlands improved it, and the newly independent United States used it to finance both its revolution and its expansion. Over time, government debt stopped being a sign of weakness and became a measure of trust. A country that could borrow was considered strong. Where empires once conquered land for gold, states now issued bonds to raise capital. Even the nature of war changed. Today, debt has become one of the largest components of the global economy. The United States is at $38 trillion, Japan at around $9 trillion, and global debt keeps rising. But here is the interesting part. Everyone is in debt, yet everyone is also part of a system where they lend to someone else. So the real question is, who is on the other side? The United States is a good example. Most of its debt is actually not foreign. It is held domestically by banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and even the central bank itself. So the simple narrative of America owes China only explains a very small part of the picture. The real debt circulates within the system itself. It is like a closed loop. The state borrows, institutions buy, the central bank supports it, and citizens pay taxes. And then the money flows back into the same system again. This is not unique to the United States. Japan lends to the U.S. The U.S. provides financing to Europe. Europe lends to developing countries. And those countries hold their reserves in Western bonds. So in reality, the world operates like one giant interconnected debt network. Everyone is tied to someone else. But there is another layer. The markets. Because what actually guides the system is not just governments, but large investors, funds, and central banks. They decide which country can borrow easily and which one will struggle. If there is trust, the system flows. If trust disappears, everything can change very quickly. Central banks are like the heart of this system, because they don't just manage debt, they also create money. When bonds are purchased, new money enters the system. That is why there is no such thing as debt-free money in this system. Everything is tied to debt somewhere. For a long time, this system worked because of trust. Investors believed governments would repay their obligations. But what happens if that trust breaks? We have seen it before. In Greece, when the debt crisis hit, the system nearly froze. The IMF and the European Central Bank intervened, but the result was harsh austerity policies. The population suffered heavily. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a permanent cycle of crisis. In Sri Lanka, the debt crisis directly brought the country to a standstill. In moments like these, the real face of the system becomes visible. Creditors emerge clearly. But what happens next? The system does not fully collapse. Debts are restructured, new loans are issued, and the cycle continues. Because today, debt is not really meant to be repaid. It is meant to be rolled over. In other words, old debt is paid with new debt. To be honest, a scenario where the United States fully pays off its $38 trillion is not realistic. Japan has been rolling over its debt for decades because government bonds are seen as the safest asset in the system. If this structure were to break, the entire global financial system would be shaken. That is why the system actually depends on debt continuing. Debt is, in a sense, the rhythm of capitalism. It must keep flowing. This is why the idea of paying off the debt is often misleading. The goal is not to eliminate debt, but to keep it sustainable. But there is a critical detail. The gains in this system are not distributed equally. Interest payments flow upward. In other words, while the majority pay taxes, the gains go mostly to large funds and asset holders. So debt is not only a relationship between countries, it is also a transfer of wealth within society. Those at the bottom carry the debt, while those at the top benefit from it. But in the end, everyone is part of the same system. The problem arises when the system starts to stall. Then the question appears, who are we actually indebted to? But the honest answer is there is no single person. Not China, not Wall Street, not the IMs, all of them, and in truth, all of us are part of this structure. The modern financial system has turned debt into money itself. Governments issue it, banks expand it, investors trade it, and people become dependent on it. The line between debtor and creditor has almost completely disappeared. Debt used to mean bondage. Today, it is what keeps the system running. But if the balance breaks, the entire story loses its meaning. And what remains is a very simple truth. Debt is not something that can be sustained forever. It is only a promise that can be postponed. Finally, you can support my channel by subscribing. I look forward to your comments and likes. See you in the next video. With your support, I will return with more content. Remember, all answers are hidden within history,